Our locked-in dough has been resting for about 10 minutes. I did pop mine in the fridge for that time because it was a little hot here in my apartment. So we're gonna go ahead and unwrap this.
This is the paton?
This is the paton, yes. This is our integrated piece of dough. Okay, I'm gonna give this a little flour on the top and bottom, and then I like to flip this back to the side where my flaps are, just because I always like to kind of keep an eye on what might be the more vulnerable side of the dough. So if you have an area of the dough that looks thin, where you think you might spring a leak, keep an eye on that part and keep that on the top. When I start rolling when I start with my first turn, I actually don't start with rolling. I start again with pressing that dough down. So I'm just getting up again on my tiptoes, and using the heel of my hand to flatten this dough. And I'm doing a couple things here. One is I'm really securing the top of the dough and the bottom of the dough to that barrage so that those things are gonna move together. I'm also getting some feedback by pressing down and making sure that my butter feels okay. So it should feel firm, but still flexible. So it'll tell me if this is at the right temperature and if it's ready to go.
So if it feels like too squishy,
Yeah, if your butter feels like it's spilling out already, or it feels really squishy, go ahead and put it back in the fridge for a few minutes. If it feels stiff and like it's cracking, we can rewrap this and let it sit on the bench for a little bit longer. But this feels good. I am going to use a rolling pin like this. You could use any kind of rolling pin, but I want to talk a little bit about the rolling style. So when we're rolling this dough out, we want to make sure that we keep that butter evenly sandwiched between the top and bottom layers of dough. The issue with a handled rolling pin is that there's always a tendency to roll back and forth and back and forth. And what often happens with that is that you end up with large pockets of butter at the front and back of your dough, instead of keeping a nice sandwich there. You can use a handled rolling pin, and I know a lot of people have handled rolling pins as their only pin, but what I would recommend in that instance is actually staying away from the handles and just using your hands on the pin itself. You have a lot more control that way. Okay, so the way we're going to roll this out to keep everything sandwiched, and this is most important in the first turn. As the layers of butter get thinner and thinner, you need to be less and less persnickety, but for now we'll be pretty precise about this. I'm going to gently start on the edge and just roll back and forth a couple of inches, and then I'm going to move to a new section of the dough and roll back and forth just a couple of inches. And I'm going to do this all the way to the middle of my dough. This method of rolling keeps those nicely sandwiched, and it helps keep my dough nice and uniform. Nice and squared off. Also at this stage, we want to go ahead and pull any corners that are starting to kind of round off and keep this in a nice square shape. Now I'm going to rotate the dough, and I'm going to do that same thing again on this side. I'm going to secure it, roll back and forth for a couple inches, and again, just kind of move my way towards the middle of the dough. Okay. So now what we've done is we've nicely distributed that butter, and now we can roll a little more freely without worrying about ending up with pockets of butter getting moved around. So I'm just going to go back over what I just did, and I'm applying a little bit more pressure and moving a little bit further with each roll. And I'm also continuing to keep an eye on these corners and pull them back into the shape. As I said before with the lock-in, when you're working with croissant dough, especially at these early stages, it's definitely a combination of rolling the dough with a pin and then manipulating the dough by hand to get it into the shape that you want. Lots of people get very annoyed by these air bubbles. These are sort of a natural byproduct of course, the fermentation that's happening in the dough. It's best to try to ignore them, or if you can, move them out the edge of the dough. I'm going to go ahead and flip this dough over, because I always like to know what's happening on both sides. In case there's a tear on this side, I want to be able to fold it into the dough so that we don't see it. So I'm going to grab up here by the top third of the dough and just flip it. And it's sticking a little bit here, so I'm glad I did that. I'm going to give that a little flour. and then I'm gonna roll just a little bit longer. We want this dough to be around a 1/2 inch thick. I like to, once my dough is folded up, which we're gonna fold it in 3, I like it to never be more than about 1.5 inches thick so that it chills quickly and evenly. Okay. Often, if your dough feels tough and like it won't roll any longer, that's a good stage at which to flip that dough over. Often when you flip it over, you'll find that you can get some more length. So this looks good to me. I've got these nice angular corners, and this is about a 1/2 inch thick. And I'm just gonna give it one last roll, and then I'm gonna grab my brush, and we're gonna fold it up. Now, you can fold it with either the flap side or the non-flap side on the inside. I usually just choose whatever side doesn't look as smooth. So if you have any tears or anything like that, go ahead and hide those inside the dough. You'll never see them again. Okay, so I've taken off all the extra flour so that the dough will adhere to itself nicely. And then I'm going to fold this in thirds, square this off. Again, lots of sort of manual adjustments to your dough. Now we want to make sure that this is all lined up, and this is actually a little too far over. So often people, when they start making croissant dough, will be tempted to put their dough away like this or like this, so not totally lined up. We want to make sure that we're adding 3 new layers at each turn. So you want to make sure that this is really meticulously lined up. So I'm actually going to pull this over just a little bit and then fold. So if you hold your hand flat, you should feel both the top and the side of that dough. When we go to wrap this dough, you often have to rearrange the dough once you move it into the plastic wrap. So keep fiddling with it and making sure that it's in that nice shape. Okay? And this is gonna go in the fridge. Often home fridges don't chill all that evenly, so it's worth flipping this over about halfway through the chilling process. So 20-25 minutes, I go ahead and flip it both horizontally and vertically, like so. Now we're gonna rest this for 30 to 45 minutes, and we will talk about what we're looking for when I come back. That was turn 1. Yes, we are done with turn 1. If you are concerned that you might forget which turn you're at, croissant dough is harder to forget because it's only 3 turns, but things like puff pastry have 6 turns. So often bakers will mark their dough like so. So 1 turn. So if someone else picks up the project, they know exactly where the dough is.